This is Fountain
Every
Street
week I find
Church.
it hard to find the best ones, but somehow, like I said, you'll hear what I'm trying to say even when the words
Here,
are...
we strive to free the mind, grow the soul, and change the world. Here, there is freedom to doubt and freedom to believe. Here, you can find a house of prayer for all people.
The swallow up Jonah.
Welcome to Fountain Street Church. Join us on the journey.
Well, that's that. After all of the hoopla for the last few months, it's finally over, isn't it? Actually, 2 elections took place this week, and I won one and lost the other. We all know one of them, which is the national election, and the few people who bothered to vote on the status of my facial hair voted in the negative, so they're gone. I'm mourning them now, but... Now, gloating is never good form in anyone's election, all right? Be kind. Be kind. In reality, we know, though, at the end of all these elections that the results are neither the best of times nor the worst of times. The reality is that now that the poetic portion of our program is over, the prosaic work of governing must resume. This is the place where grammar and punctuation matter. It's no fun and it's really very boring, but it's the part we have to do. Now that we've decided on what we think we should be doing, let's start doing it. And that's true for me every week as I try to make some sense out of a few words that will be of value and clarity. So I always hope my honesty trumps any eloquence I have. With the words that I always begin with, may these words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my Redeemer. One thing we can say with absolute conviction that unites all of us after the national election is that we are all relieved to be able to turn on our televisions and not be nauseated, or look at our mailboxes, or not answer the phone. If you don't have caller ID, you're getting it this week, aren't you? Good people. Because I think if there is one thing that people would change, all of us if we could, and maybe we will someday, is how we elect our leaders. I know this is how democracy works now, but it may turn out that the only truly free market we have in our economy is the campaign market. Because when you advertise food, you have to tell them what's in it, but if you advertise a candidate, you don't. And when you advertise a car, when you buy it, it has to be safe, but when you advertise a candidate, you don't. And when you get the wrong thing, you can sue someone for false advertising, but when you vote for a candidate, you can't. In fact, you can yell fire in the theater of democracy and no one can sue you at all. So it's time for us, I think, to think about how we do this. But that's my opinion. In my view, we are certainly in an age that feels very much like the history books describe the turn of the 20th century. Historian Sean Wilentz chronicles the messy and often sordid story of government and its excesses in a book he calls The Rise of American Democracy. And as I was reading it, I had some insights. We have been buying and selling politicians ever since George Washington sold hard cider to people in the woods to get the vote. Yep, the father of our country bought votes. And we're not unique. Anyone who knows a little European history might be familiar with the phrase rotten borough. In the English parliamentary world, in the 19th century, there were boroughs that were so small that 7 voters could elect a member to parliament. In another city, it would take thousands. And these were considered rotten boroughs because for a very small amount of money, you could bribe all of them, 7 people, as it were. And of course, it was the German Otto von Bismarck who famously observed, laws are like sausages. It's better not to see either of them being made. And I guess he's speaking from experience, right? But if I have to go past my historical knowledge, it does seem that our times are unusual because we don't even pretend it is a noble endeavor anymore. It is so venal that we just accept it and expect it. Having said that, I'll veer back to my theme this month, a month of remembering, a time when the month is filled with opportunities to look back on people who are dear to us. Last week we observed the Day of the Dead from the tradition of the Mexicans, and this Sunday is the very Veterans Day of the 11th day of the 11th month on the 11th hour. Our welcomer, Jim Winter Troutwine, was trying to time it so he would be speaking at the 11th minute as well. And of course, it was called Armistice Day back then, but then the war to end all wars produced yet another war called World War II, and now we call it Veterans Day, when we honor not just those who fell in combat, but those who served in the service as well. And what strikes me at this very minute, at this very moment as I was thinking about this sermon all week, is the irony of the juxtaposition of how close Veterans Day is to Election Day. Because the first Election Day concluded one of the most craven, mean-spirited, and frankly brutal exercises in democracy that I ever remembered. It was including even a truly naked attempt to purchase the electorate. The second, Veterans Day, honors the 1 million souls or more who have sacrificed of themselves to preserve this system that is being bought and sold for the highest bidder. They fought for government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and we vote for the money, of the money, and with the money. In contemplating this irony, the story from the Christian lectionary seems to offer some insight, so let me unfold it a little for you. You remember the story. There's Jesus and his entourage, his crew, his disciples. You can use whatever term you like. And they're hanging around on the streets, hoodlums maybe. Maybe they're in some ancient Starbucks looking around, but they're outside the treasury where people voluntarily drop off money for the temple. We know it's voluntary because tax collectors were everywhere, and that's completely involuntary. So anyone who's dropping off money is doing it because they choose to. And Jesus notices that as they stand there watching people dropping money in the treasury for the temple, that some people are lavishingly putting big gifts there. Think of the Donald Trump of the day flipping his biblical hair back over his head, parking gold and silver and diamond rings so that everyone can see, or someone named maybe Adelson writing large checks and making sure they flit down upon the right priest. And then up comes this very small widow. We know she's a widow because single women in ancient Palestine came in two forms, widowed or married. And if you were married, you didn't walk around alone. And the only way a woman could have enough money to live would be to be married, to have a father, or to have a son. So we know she was poor, we know she was single, and she put in one coin that was worth less than a penny. I did some research. It was considered to be 1/64th of a day's labor in a poor market. It would be the equivalent of 70 cents. And Jesus then turns to his disciples, followers, entourage, crew, buddies, whatever you want to call them, and said, "You see that woman over there? She put in more than everybody else." And of course they look at him and say, No way. That can't be true. And Jesus says, think about it. When someone who has a lot puts in a lot, you know they still have a lot left over.